Hello, it's Chris from Hands on Health UK here, and in this podcast we will be exploring the topic of emotional eating. We have a real treat for you here today, and I don't mean a slice of cake. I have with me in the studio two experts here to discuss emotional eating and to provide some helpful hints and tips on how to tackle it if you need to rein it in. So without further ado, let's get into it. Sam, Richard, it's great to see you both again. I'll let you introduce yourselves if that's okay, Richard. Should we start with you?
Yep, I'm Richard Nichols. I'm a psychotherapist and a hypnotherapist, and I work in the Midlands in the UK.
And author. Haven't you released a book recently?
Yes, I had a book out for the new year, 15 Minutes to Happiness. Available in all good bookshops, folks.
Ha! Sam, thanks for your time. Would you like to introduce yourself to our listeners?
Hi, I'm Sam Culshaw Robinson. I've got three sides of my business really. I have a general hypnotherapy practice, which is called What's the Alternative Therapy, where I see people with various different issues. And I see a lot of people whose issues are around emotional eating, even if they don't come presenting with that. They might come because of some other reason, but that might be part of their behaviour. I have an alter ego, which is Madam Weight Loss, which is the business where I see people who are overweight. But I also see people in the workplace as well. That's the Work Well practice.
Wow, so you're both very busy people and we're lucky to have you. So, emotional eating. Should we start with the basics? What does the term emotional eating actually mean?
When it comes to emotional eating, it's worth looking at those two words. It's eating because of emotion, rather than something that's going on within your stomach. Your body isn't hungry for food; it's hungry for something else, and it's finding what that something else is.
And on that point, there's a whole sort of theory about where you get these feelings in your body. You know, it's in our language, isn't it? We get a gut feeling. So often it's felt in the belly.
That's interesting. So you're saying it can be quite difficult to sometimes identify our emotions and we confuse that with hunger?
Yes, there's quite a few different reasons for that really. There's the hormones that come up in your body when you're stressed out, they actually increase your appetite. So stress can make you reach for food.
And why is it that our bodies have that reaction, do you think?
If we go back in our ancient history, the only way we could get the species moving along, and natural selection has done this, natural selection favours a species that will hide in the case of emergencies, that will run away from saber-toothed tigers. So we learn emotion. The thing is, in the 21st century, there's lots of reasons to be emotional. But if our brain says you are in danger, and there's only two ways, if you go back long enough into our history, that we were in danger. One, something was going to get us, or we won't get through the winter. There aren't enough crops, there isn't enough food. You haven't got to go back that far in our history, really. When we've been knocking around on this planet for 6 million years, it's only in the last few hundred years that the food hasn't been scarce. So it's no surprise that we're going to have this instinct inside all of us still that goes back 6 million years that says, you're in danger, something's not right, quick, get some food inside of you.
So, surprisingly, just like animals, we also have animal instincts.
Yes, and often research has shown that it's more sort of high carb sorts of food. You don't sort of reach for cabbage when you're feeling stressed out. Mm-hmm. You reach for a donut, chips, something like that.
That reminds me. I was chatting to a doctor a couple of weeks ago as part of my book, and in it I talked about this research that this guy Anthony Salerno in the States did. Well, the simple experiment, we just set up a little stall, and there was these cups with M&Ms in it. You know, they'd weighed all these cups and all these M&Ms. On all the days that were there, half of the time they told people that it was a low-calorie version of an M&M. On the other half of the time, they told everybody it was a high-calorie, luxury version of the M&M sweet. Now, what they also did, as they were handing over the cup, behind them there was a poster with a very, very slightly negative phrase on it. Something that mentioned adversity. Something slightly anxious about something bad coming around the corner, but it was very, very weak, very, very slight. And half of the time, they had a completely neutral poster. They'd talk about chess or something as simple as that. Now, what we found is that if there was a poster with a negative word on it, if the person believed that that this M&M was high calorie, they ate twice as much than if it was a neutral word. If there was no anxiety, they just ate some. Tiny amount of anxiety, they ate twice as many sweets. But if they were told it was a low-calorie version, then they hardly ate any extra. There was a few extra, but it was as if the brain prioritised and said, oh yeah, we're feeling slightly anxious, but I believe that this is a low-calorie sweet, don't fill up on this. You need to go away and find something high-calorie instead. Absolutely incredible. The tiniest amount of anxiety made people eat twice as many sweets. And that's just with a poster with an anxious word on it. But we shouldn't associate food with safety. Not in the 21st century. What alternatives are there to food?
Yeah, if your guilty pleasure is reading rubbish magazines or something, sit for 10 minutes and read a rubbish magazine, or 10 minutes on your Xbox or whatever. But it's finding other behaviour that still gives you that nice sort of rosy glow rather than food.
Maybe you need to recognise what makes me happy, that gives me pleasure in life. Is it music? Is it literature? It can be other things. There are lots of different ways of getting pleasure. Sometimes it's joining new social groups. Those are the things that can make us happy, and the fridge will not necessarily provide that same level of support.
Because food's only temporary as well, that's another thing about it.
And on that, with you saying food is only temporary, would I be right in saying that you can get into a vicious cycle with emotional eating? You're feeling an emotion, you reach for the packet of biscuits or whatever, but then very soon afterwards you feel guilty because you've eaten the whole packet of biscuits, and the cycle continues.
Yes, it does. People start off the day thinking, oh, well, I'm going to be so-called good today. Food doesn't make you a good person or a bad person, so it's sort of eliminating those kind of associations as well. It can get into that cycle, but also there's a physiological thing because your blood sugar rises and then it'll take a complete nosedive if it is that sugary food. So then you feel low anyway, emotionally, and low energy. So the combination of those two things can just keep you going round and round, really.
So, do you have any tips on how we can identify when we are emotional eating rather than normal hunger, and what we can do to break the cycle?
Well, it's awareness is the first. I say knowledge is power, don't they? So that's the first step. So often what I get to do with people is I get them to keep a journal. So it's a mood and food journal. So this is not all about, what your sandwich weighs or anything like that. It's more to do with your mood throughout the day. So it teaches you, first of all, to tune in to your mood and your feelings, but you can tune into them before you eat something, after you eat something, and then you can build a sort of picture of what your patterns and triggers are. So if you know, say, that you have a meeting with your boss on a Monday late morning, and that makes you really stressed out, and you always go to the chocolate machine, maybe a bit of mindfulness breathing space, or taking a walk around the block for a couple of minutes, or up and down the corridors or whatever. So it's sort of preventative measures that you can make for yourself. Yeah, it's that awareness really that's just so important. What we need to do is learn to recognise our emotions and allow them and react to them in a positive way.
Absolutely. You can't ignore emotions. To hide them in a box and pretend they don't exist, that's going to make people feel worse.
So that's a good point actually, Richard. I have quite frequently found myself standing in front of the fridge with the door open and then realised actually I'm just bored and I'm looking in the fridge because I want something interesting to do. And I guess that's just because I'm not aware of what's driving me to stand there in the first place. Sam, you just mentioned mindfulness breathing. Now, I'm a massive fan of mindfulness. Can you tell us a little bit more about mindfulness for those that perhaps haven't heard of it yet?
So often we spend a lot of our day sort of in autopilot. So we're just going from one thing to the next thing to the next thing, completely oblivious about how we're feeling about things. Sometimes we actually want to block things out because they're unpleasant. The practice of mindfulness has come up because of all this, and it's firstly noticing the feelings and starting to allow them rather than overriding them.
Right. I've also heard of mindful eating, but don't know too much about it. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Mindful eating, it's really noticing your food. So sometimes it's almost easier to think about the opposite. So the opposite of mindful eating would be, say, if you go to the pictures and you buy a big thing of popcorn, get there a bit early, the adverts are on. So you sit there munching away, and then by the time the film starts, you look down and there's about 3 bits of popcorn and you think, well, where's that gone? So you just ate that completely mindlessly and you haven't even noticed it, you haven't savoured it, it didn't touch the sides. So that's the opposite. So mindful eating, sort of think of if you've ever seen or read the book of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, where Charlie's very poor, and so he only ever gets chocolate very, very rarely. So when he gets it, he draws it out and really savours every little tiny morsel. So it's really almost looking at the food in an objective way, as if you were from Mars or something. And you see one of the classic examples of this is doing it with a raisin, but taking it as an object and noticing its colours, the texture of it, and then sort of cutting into it with your teeth, really noticing the taste as you move it around your mouth. So it's eating very, very slowly and deliberately. And if you did that with all your food, you'd probably be sitting at the table all day. But of everything you eat, just at least have a couple of mouthfuls like that, and pausing between mouthfuls. It's that kind of attention to the detail that makes it more satisfying, so you don't need to eat as much. That's the thing. You know, if you're slowly eating it, you're enjoying it for longer, so it gives your brain a chance to register it, basically. And the less food you'll have eaten by the time you get that full feeling.
So not only will we eat less, but we're also more likely to tune into our emotions when eating mindfully. That's good to know. Is emotional eating very common? I know that I'm guilty of it, as I said, with the trips to the fridge.
Yes, everybody does emotional eating to some degree. In a way, emotional eating, it's a way of self-medicating in the way that an alcoholic would. So you're not really dealing with what's going on or really feeling it, you're just trying to mask it. So learning how to eat in a more mindful way, you're going to notice what's going on in yourself, the feelings that you're having, and be able to take the first steps to do something about it then. People, have certain situations like grief, for instance, that they can't do anything about. But if you can access your feelings and allow those feelings, then it's a life skill really that we all need to have.
Right, so it's very clear that most people have some form of relationship with food that can be healthy or unhealthy to a certain degree. Now that can move into things like eating disorders at the extremes, which doesn't affect most people, but it's probably worth talking very briefly about. So can you just give us a brief overview of what we mean by an eating disorder?
So eating disorders, abnormal eating in a nutshell. So I think we've probably all heard of anorexia, where you're really restricting what you eat. People do binge eat as well, where they just eat more than is necessary. And there's bulimia, where sometimes people use purging, as like vomiting, to get rid of the excess that they've eaten. So those are the kind of disorders. So it's a sort of unhealthy way of eating. With all those things, it's advisable to get help from your GP.
And if somebody's listening and is perhaps concerned about somebody else, a friend, a colleague, or a family member, are there any signs or indications of someone developing an eating disorder?
The signs to look out for would be changes in people's behaviour, being secretive, obviously any detriment to their health that you'd notice as well.
I'm guessing that if you are concerned about somebody, it's quite a sensitive subject. So how would you raise that with them? Or would you raise it at all? It must be incredibly tricky.
Yes, obviously it's quite difficult to talk about people's weight. It's quite a good idea not to make sort of personal comments about people's weight, because that can stay with people. And it may be that it's not a psychological thing. It may be that it's a different medical condition. So you have to be very careful. So yes, tread very carefully. I would say just open up the channel of communication. That's the most important thing. If ever you need somebody to talk to, I'm happy, and I'm not going to judge you or tell anybody. And just opening up the communication is the best thing, really.
Well, thanks guys, that's been really insightful. I must say thank you both again for your time and your profound words of wisdom on this subject. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Chris. It's a pleasure.
Yeah.
So there we have it. I hope you found this podcast interesting. I know I certainly did. It seems to me it's very important to tune into our emotions. It's really not about food, it's about mood. So question yourself next time you're reaching for a donut or a cheeseburger. Is it for the short-term hit to make yourself feel better? Or is it for a positive reason that you're just going to enjoy it? If we try to mask those underlying issues, then we won't get anywhere. Mindfulness and other tools are a great way of helping us to achieve that. There's plenty of information out there for you to check, so why don't you start with the website weightmatters.co.uk. Now everyone can experience emotional eating, but if you feel it's getting out of control, then why not speak with your GP? As always, if you've got any feedback or questions, we'd love to hear from you. You can drop us a line using the email hello@boostwellbeing.co.uk. You can give us a call on 0115 928 7889, or you can find us on Twitter and Facebook. Until the next time, take care.